Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tales from the Table Studios. I'm Lion, he, they, and we're here with another episode of Roll for Perspective, a show where I sit down with content creators, GMs, artists, game designers, and more within the TTRPG space to discuss systems, tips, and other insights. For this episode, I'm actually really excited because I'm getting to sit down with Moss Powers from Brewis Tabletop Games to discuss their games, the creative process, and more. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited. I know I said this already, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, but I'm so excited to have you on. I've been looking forward to this since we first spoke about it. Why don't you take a moment to tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
All right. I am Moss Powers. I'm a game designer. I've been doing this about 3 years now, technically, but I started with board games before tabletop. Um, so 3 or 4 years in board games and tabletop combined, I guess. The last couple of years, I've shifted over to tabletop games. I've published a decent handful of games now. I want to say like 8 or 9 games I've got out there. I work with a small team called Brewis Tabletop Games, mostly myself and the graphic designer, and then a couple other regular contributors. We publish games usually in our own systems, so not based off of other engines or anything like that, or SRDs, usually bespoke systems for the game that we come up with concept wise. And yeah, I live in Seattle and enjoy the Pacific Northwest here, and just in general, I'm a game designer.
Awesome. So I usually start off with the same question with everyone, because I feel like it's a good baseline, which is, where did you first get into TTRPGs and what is it that kept you coming back?
All right. So I would say my on ramp for TTRPGs started with, like many people, D&D. Um, I played D&D when I was in middle school because I started, I guess, technically before that with like imagination games with friends, and later we added dice to keep things fair. So I was technically making TTRPGs before I even knew what they were. Um, but we used to play randomized like monster games, and then eventually we shifted over to D&D. We played D&D third edition before 3.5 updated it. Um, so that was my on ramp when I was in middle school, and I kind of stuck in the hobby for quite a few years after that. Um, I've always been like the forever GM in my group. I was the one that was running things, putting together adventures for everyone to play in. But that basically kept steady throughout all of my life. And at a certain point, I decided I wanted to create them. I started with board games because I'm a LARPer, in fact, and I made a card game for my LARP because I wanted to enhance the culture that we had at the camping events that we were going to. And from there, I discovered that I had a decent knack for board games, and I kind of shifted it over to tabletops not too long after that. And I've been designing ever since.
I've spoken to a couple people before who have been like really big into LARP as well, before they got like too deep into tabletops, and I hear a lot of people tell me that there's a lot of pieces that you take from like LARP and you bring over that give you sort of almost a different way of viewing storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel that way? Is that something that you feel is like an accurate statement at all?
I would say that's accurate. Storytelling in LARP in particular is interesting because I come from a combat LARP. So the combat is the forefront of the LARP experience for what I do, but there's a entirely optional lore component that everyone has their own like personal storylines, but none of it's officially canon. I LARP in Belagarth Medieval Combat Society. It's more of a fantasy game, but I write lore consistently there, even though it's completely optional. So I was a lore person and I was a storyteller, and I would get around campfires and tell stories. And I think that comes across in an interesting way in TTRPGs because I've got a feel for one, improv and performance, but for two, like structures of safety, consent, collaboration, all those kinds of things that really show up a lot in the tabletops world are very prevalent in LARP as well. But it gives you like a specific appreciation for some things that some people might miss in that kind of onboarding.
Right.
I know not everyone's on board with safety tools necessarily. There's some recent dialogue about that, but that's a big proponent I'm a big proponent of obviously using safety tools, but it comes from my LARP background. A lot of it is like safety first. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that definitely brings in that perspective. And as far as the storytelling, like we work on a wiki, so there's a lot of collaborative storytelling, and you kind of have to be very careful not to overwrite other people's material or write material that may not work with other people's as well. So the collaborative aspect definitely comes across in tabletop games as well, but I get a sense of that coming in from LARP.
That makes perfect sense. And
Mhm.
just to touch a little bit, you brought up like the safety tool conversation that's been going on in the discourse that's been going around online, and it's almost kind of a shame that there is this sort of contingent of people that do seem to be resistant to the idea of safety tools because they really are such an important part of
Yeah.
being able to ensure everyone is comfortable telling the story you're telling. And
Mhm.
there's so many different ways to go about telling these stories through the medium of TTRPGs that it really is so important to make sure everyone's on board and understands where you're going, why you're going there, and what everyone's looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry to
Um,
sort of like hop on that podium for a moment, but I
no,
do think it's like
I mean
super
it's an
important to.
important pillar of the community, honestly, to have that availability for safety tools and that conversation with so many people. But um, the idea of having like honestly a space where people can come together and feel safe is so important for when you're exploring fantasy games or exploring any kind of uh, fictional storytelling. Like one of the things I talk about with Brew's Tabletop Games as part of our mission statement is understanding the power balance between storytellers and their audience. Because I think that um, there's a lot of dynamic that goes into that, like power dynamics of just one person platformed for telling a story and other people listening or other people like being involved in the conversation. So I think there's definitely room for some dialogue about that, just in general, but specifically when it comes to like safety tools and things like that. It's really important to have something that can make sure that that power balance isn't abused, or make sure that everyone's on board with the stories that are being told, and make sure everyone's having fun, honestly.
Yeah, and I think all of those are really important points to sort of make sure people understand because it's all so true. And if you talk to a lot of people like who play TTRPGs, there are so many different things that are offered through doing so, and so many different ways you can explore different narratives and different like viewpoints and understandings of things. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the favorite things that I've heard recently is TTRPGs aren't therapy but are therapeutic, and I think that safety tools are
Yes,
such an important part of why that works the way it does
absolutely.
because it really does permit for people to have these experiences that they either couldn't have elsewhere or just to find parts of themselves that they haven't been able to express in other parts of their life.
Yeah, and self-expression and things like that are in a safe place gives people so much room for growth, like just as a human being. Being able to be in a place where you can be experimental with like your social norms or like what's going on with your expression or who you are, all those things, like it's phenomenal what TTRPGs can do for like your confidence, your expression, your individual like self-discovery journey, like all that stuff.
Yeah,
TTRPGs are a magical space, and I absolutely love them.
yeah, I can't agree more. On a recent episode that will probably be up by the time this is, um, I spoke to Will from Live from the Apocalypse about something similar, and overall, just there are a lot of those stories out there, myself included, where people really have learned fundamental parts of themselves or learned how to grow through TTRPGs. It's just such a powerful medium for that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'll gonna bring us like full circle. The safety tools permit that. They allow you to feel safe to explore yourself or the world outside yourself in that way.
Yeah.
And of course also like the other thing you mentioned, fun. We're here to have fun. We're here to tell stories together collectively as a group of friends, or whether you're doing it for an audience or just your players or whatnot,
Yeah,
it's supposed to be enjoyable, and it's hard to do that if you don't feel like you're in a secure place.
exactly.
So the next thing that I did want to ask about, so we talked, a little bit about like Brewis Tabletop, and when it comes to when did you first decide you wanted to like really sit down and start designing games?
Um, so like I said, I've been a GM and like a storyteller and all sorts of world builder for many, many years, but I was actually inspired by Humblewood, the campaign setting for D&D that came out. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really well done. I would love to do a big setting guide look like this. And I started working and I gathered a team together and we all started working on a 5e supplement basically. We got pretty far on it. We were really happy with how it was going. But it was too large in scope, I think. Um, and so at a certain point, it kind of, we felt the frustrations of it not being completed or like deadlines like being too far out, and just everything just kept getting pushed back because we just didn't have the manpower to like push through it basically. Um, and so at a certain point, I'm like, okay, I know as a technique that I've heard for like feeling like you have a little more control over something, like just accomplish something small. And so I put together a small indie game in the meantime while I was waiting for my big tabletop campaign setting to finish. I threw together an indie game and I was like, okay, I'll just do this real quick. And I threw it together in like a month, and it was, I guess, just an exercise in control over what I was like feeling in a space where I was feeling like I didn't have enough control over what I was doing, basically. But it kind of empowered me to continue making games. And even though the 5e supplement has kind of fallen off and I don't know if it'll ever get finished, I still make indie games, and I kind of discovered the joy in doing that along the way. But yeah, it was really when I sat down and like I was inspired by another like source book that was doing well, and I thought was really ingenious, that I wanted to put my stories to words and kind of put them down on paper. And I think, yeah, I think it was just a moment of inspiration that I decided that I wanted to run with.
Like that a lot. I think another really like useful like tip that you touched on here is, sometimes, yeah, these big projects can get very emotionally and mentally grating and draining and exhausting, and
Absolutely.
sometimes just finding those small pieces where you can focus and you can push and you can do that can really make all the difference. And especially in this, case where you've come out with some amazing stuff in this time period, that sort of, if I'm understanding right, all started with this idea of, well, let me focus on something that's a little more in my control and a little smaller and a little more direct focus to
Yeah.
to get to where you are now.
Yeah. I have a habit of making games while I'm waiting to finish another game. Um, so like if a game gets too large in my scope, I'll take some time off and just start working on another game and try to get that one almost done. But like I've built games while I'm waiting for games, basically.
Yeah,
That happens fairly frequently. I think having that sense of accomplishment really does so much good for your brain when you're trying to manage a larger scope project. And I know so many of us are guilty of like scope creep. Like when we get involved in a project, like everything tends to just get a little bigger, just get a little bigger, just get a little bigger until it's huge. And then we feel like we can't manage it. I know a lot of people suffer from that phenomenon. But I think like most of my games are probably under 30 pages. They're very compact, and I try to keep them manageable. Uh, I do want to eventually do like larger games or like finish something huge and epic, but right now I'm content just doing small stuff, and I think that's good for me and it's good for what I've been doing. Like it works for me.
definitely. What how do you find yourself settling on the ideas for the games that you do make?
Usually I run through, like, I have a backlog of creative ideas that are just kind of floating in the void. I'm like, oh, that would be a fun game idea. That would be a fun game idea. That would be a fun game idea. But I'll sit down and I'll just draft out something. And if it seems like it's going anywhere, I will see how it feels in writing it out. If it's something I'm excited about and genuinely want to finish, then obviously I can run with that enthusiasm and work on finishing it. But if I find myself kind of burdened by it or slogged by it, like I don't want to finish it or I'm dreading getting it done, I kind of put it to the side and maybe I'll come back to it, maybe I won't. But generally, I enjoy games, or I work on games that I enjoy. So if it excites me, then I will finish the project. That's kind of my ethos for deciding what I'm working on and what I'm not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just this idea of, for a lot of people, I've again, and I know I keep equating this to other things I've heard. It's just kind of how my brain works a lot of the time. Um, where like, people sometimes will get an idea and they'll start working on it, and then as it develops, they're like, I don't like what this is turning into, but I'm not willing to stop because I want to finish this. And
Yeah,
it can be so
that sunk cost fallacy.
yeah, exactly. And it can be so detrimental to I mean everything really, but like the creative process, mental health, just the amount of spoons you have at any given time, just cool.
Yeah.
And it's really good to get that sort of insight from, again, you've made some phenomenal games. You have and it's cool just getting to sort of see the mind behind these games and the process that goes into that. Speaking of the process, another thing I would love to know a little bit more about is like what your design process looks like from like start to finish.
All right. So generally, I start with an idea, like an aesthetic or a name or just a mechanic that I want to implement in something. And I kind of play around with it in a Word document. I'll open up Google Docs or whatever and just kind of write out anything vaguely related to that concept. I'll be like, I often build out from set pieces is another thing. So like, I'm working on a game right now. I'll spoil a little bit on this for my future game that's coming out, but I'm working on a game called Hell Whalers. It's about whalers in hell that are hunting a whale to save their souls, basically. And I had the idea of like, well, whaling is an interesting concept in general. Like it's very, I guess, metal in some ways is the closest adjective I can think of. But
Sure.
whaling is metal, and whaling in hell is extra metal. So the idea of like facing down with a huge entity on its turf and dealing with this like absolute behemoth of a creature on its own territory, like that's something that makes me think a lot. And I wanted to design something around that set piece. So I sat down in a Google Doc, I started writing it out, and I decided, okay, well, how will this work? Like what is good for this aesthetic? In this case, I decided on an interesting meta gambling game, which is bizarre, but I'm hoping people will be excited for it. It's fun. But I'll just write out like a mechanic that I think might support that theme. Or if I had started with a mechanic, I'll write out a theme that supports the mechanic. And I'll keep working on any idea related to either of those things for as long as it takes until I have a page full of ideas. And then I just start threading them together. And I'm like, okay, so what do I need to make this look like an actual game? Do I need character creation? Do I need a final boss battle? Do I need what do I need? Skill resolution, non-combat resolution. What do I need? Level design, encounters. Just start filling out what you need. And then when you have that list of everything that you need, you just start organizing it. And once you've got it organized, it starts to fall into place and it becomes a game. And then from there, I usually pass it off to my graphic designer / layout artist. She's our artistic director, and she can turn my loose ideas into magic.
So one of the things you mentioned for this game, and that I've noticed in a number of your others, is you do tend to like use these really unique concepts for like resolution of things throughout the game that is more than just rolling a die.
Mhm.
What sort of made you gravitate towards things like that for your
Uh,
games?
I would say it's my board game background because, like I said, I designed board games before I designed tabletops,
Right.
and so I really like fiddly mechanics is the best way to describe them. Things that you can play with that feel like a game before you're even thinking about the fiction. So like gamifying the actual mechanics within a game, because like you can tell a storytelling game. There was a tweet that I retweeted recently that was unironically one of my favorite concepts for a tabletop game, but it's just the role playing game where thumbs up if you succeed, thumbs down if you fail. Everyone just votes at the table. I think that's a brilliant idea personally.
Yeah.
Um, but it's loose storytelling and it doesn't have that same fiddly mechanic that I would do. Um, but I like games where beyond just a loose storytelling like framework, like a thumbs up, thumbs down, you have a micro game within a game. So I really try to focus on games that have some sort of component where you're looking for a number on the die, or you're comparing to things, or you activate something on a chart and it does something to something else. Like I like games that do things when you roll the dice, or do things when you flip a card, or do things when you spend a token, or whatever it may be. But I like games within games, and I think it really comes from my board gaming background because there's a lot of layered pieces within pieces that come from board game design. Um, but yeah, I think it all stems from that, really, board game design.
And I think it really does like poke at a particular part of our brains, right? When we play games like that, where we have the narrative like situation that we're in, we have our fiction, we have our storytelling game, but then getting to sort of like you said, like a fit, like you use the term fiddly, right? Like a fiddly,
Mm-hmm.
something else that we do interacting with each other is also just such a fun aspect to include, and again, can sometimes allow us to just connect on different levels, which I think kind of goes back to what we spoke about a little bit a couple minutes ago
Yeah,
with how TTRPGs allow us to connect with ourselves and others and the world around us.
I think there's something fundamental about seeing the way certain things work, like mathematics, or seeing dice on a cube. Like for instance, people love dice just because it's this concept of I have a rock, I throw the rock and it shows me a number. Like that's just fascinating to human beings, I think. I think there's a fundamental human experience that is spoken to by something as simple as a randomizer as a die.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So in my fun line fact, in my off time I do like magic. I do like card magic and stuff like that. And
Oh, nice.
again, I sort of will connect it to what you're saying here, where it's there are these fundamental things that just we as people enjoy. We like these things and gravitate towards them, and regardless of what they represent in the moment, getting to interact with them and getting to do things with them just really does sort of almost on a primal level, sort of poke at something really nice in our heads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think magic is definitely one of those things that will do that for a lot of people because it's such a spectacle of like, it feels fun to be amazed by things.
Yeah,
Um, and same with the grandeur of dice and things like that, like the ability to tell stories that are super epic speaks to something very human. And I think that's something really important.
yeah, absolutely. And again, I know I keep repeating it, but it really does feed into more of just I love the idea of this like the TTRPG community because inherently the way that the games work, whether it's the very straightforward roll your die, do your math, be done, go on, whether it's the really narrative focused games where you're rolling dice two or three times per session and that's it, or whether we're doing stuff that's more fiddly, it really is just building the sense of community through all the things that we really, really enjoy just experiencing and doing and being a part of. And I think that your games really do capture that so well.
Yeah, I think having people come together over a shared experience is something very powerful. And um, honestly, that's what I love about TTRPGs in general. I won't say it's unique to my games or anything, but TTRPGs bring people together in a way that feels good. And I hope to be in this space for a long time because I love it.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that sentiment. So the next thing I would love to ask is, for any like aspiring game designers out there, are there any things that you would impart or offer as insights or knowledges that they should have before they get too deep into it, or even if they've already started, things that would be good to know?
Um, like I touched on earlier, mind your scope creep. Try to keep things manageable. Just if you feel stuck or don't feel like you can accomplish something, do something small. Write a magic item. Do something for a game you already know. Build a one-page RPG. Just create something. If you want to stay creative and you want to be creative, just create. And I know it's easier said than done sometimes. Sometimes we hit walls with that, but um, sometimes you just gotta let it happen naturally, and it's kind of out of your hands at a certain point. But um, yeah, just the best advice I can give to anyone trying to get or stay in TTRPGs is just make TTRPGs.
It's good advice. It's very true. And people will find different ways to work through the different like walls or blocks that they come up against. And
Mhm.
obviously, for some people, it works to just sort of take a step away for a moment, and other people have to just like work through that wall. And
Yeah,
I think it's also important to put out there that like both methods are super valid. Just finding what works for you, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So I think we're starting to run a little short on time here. I do want to say thank you so much for sitting down with me today and having this conversation. Is there any closing thoughts you'd like to put out into the world?
Closing thoughts. Closing thoughts. I don't have a whole lot as far as closing thoughts, honestly. It's been really fun. I've enjoyed the conversation. I think the like the human experience of TTRPGs and storytelling and things like that is something that really stuck with me from the conversation we had today. And I think having that in mind is just, I don't know, something about TTRPGs is just so fundamentally human to me. And I think that thinking about that in a context of like safety and consent and frameworks of support and expression and things like that really speaks to a lot of why TTRPGs make so many people happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
I
my
think
thought.
I think that's a great thought. It's very well said. If you have enjoyed this episode, you can find out more. You can find more from Moss and Brewis Tabletop on Twitter, and you guys are on Itch, right?
Yep.
And all of that will be linked down below. Uh, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to everyone for watching. Remember, take care of yourself, love yourself, and don't forget to always tell your tales. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.